Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to be exploring a topic that spans centuries and continents, one that's full of dazzling discoveries and epic stories.
That's right. We're going to be taking a journey through the history of Islamic civilization.
A history that's often misunderstood, right? I
Yeah,
mean, there's so many misconceptions floating around out there.
absolutely. And that's part of what makes this deep dive so exciting. We're going to peel back the layers, challenge some assumptions, and uncover a story that's both fascinating and complex.
I'm already intrigued, so where do we
Yeah.
begin? What's the starting point for this grand narrative?
Well, we have to start in the Arabian Peninsula. Before the rise of Islam, this was a very different world. Think vast deserts, nomadic tribes, and a unique culture shaped by isolation and a harsh environment.
Okay, so paint me a picture of this pre-Islamic Arabia. What was life like for the people who lived there?
Imagine a land where survival depended on your tribe, where family ties were everything. The environment was unforgiving, scorching hot days and frigid nights. It was a place where resilience was a necessity. And it was in this landscape that a unique culture blossomed.
It's hard to imagine such a harsh environment giving rise to a sophisticated civilization.
And yet it did. Trade played a huge role. The Arabian Peninsula was strategically located at the crossroads of major trade routes connecting the East and West. The Arabs became skilled navigators and merchants, facilitating the exchange of goods and ideas from as far as India and China to Europe and Africa.
So they were connecting the world even back then. Yeah. Fascinating. What about their beliefs? What was the religious landscape like before Islam?
Pre-Islamic Arabia was a polytheistic society. Think of the Kaaba in Mecca, a shrine that housed hundreds of idols, drawing pilgrims from all over. It was a central part of their spiritual life, but also their economy.
It's interesting how religion and economics were so intertwined. So then, in the 7th century CE, along comes the Prophet Muhammad with a radically different message: monotheism. One God, Allah. What was the reaction to this new faith?
Well, it was a huge disruption. Imagine challenging the status quo, rejecting the gods that had been worshipped for centuries. The Quraysh tribe, who controlled Mecca and the Kaaba, saw this new faith as a threat to their power and their way of life.
I can imagine. Challenging those in power rarely ends well. So what happened to these early Muslims? Were they embraced with open arms?
Not quite. They faced persecution, boycotts, even violence. Muhammad and his followers had to flee Mecca in 622 CE and seek refuge in Medina. This event, known as the Hijra, is a pivotal moment in Islamic history.
A turning point.
Yeah.
And I know Medina wasn't just a safe haven, right? It's where the first Muslim community truly took shape.
That's right. It's where Islam transformed from a fledgling faith to a political and social force. Muhammad established a community based on principles of justice, equality, and unity.
A blueprint for a new society, basically. But this new society faced challenges, right? Conflicts with those who opposed them.
Exactly. There were battles like the Battle of Badr and the Battle of Uhud. These were defining moments for the early Muslim community, testing their strength and solidifying their resolve.
Those battles sound intense. It wasn't an easy path for them.
It wasn't. But despite the challenges, the Muslim community in Medina grew stronger, eventually leading to the conquest of Mecca in 630 CE.
That must have been a remarkable moment. Returning to Mecca after years of exile, finally claiming the city where it all began, what happened then?
Well, Muhammad destroyed the idols in the Kaaba, establishing it as a sacred site for Muslims. But he also showed remarkable leniency toward the Meccans who had opposed him. It set a precedent for future conquests, a blend of military might and a message of mercy.
That's fascinating. So Islam is now firmly rooted in Arabia, but what happens next? We know the Muslim empire expands rapidly, but how did that happen so quickly?
It's a complex story, but several factors were at play. For one, the major powers in the region, the Byzantines and the Persians, were exhausted after years of conflict. This created a power vacuum that the Muslims were able to exploit.
So timing played a role, being in the right place at the right time.
Definitely. But the Muslims were also brilliant strategists, and perhaps most importantly, they were driven by a powerful unifying force, Islam itself.
It was more than just conquest. It was about spreading a new world order.
Absolutely. And this new order needed structure. As Islam spread, so too did Arabic, becoming the language of administration, scholarship, and trade.
Wow, so Arabic went from the language of a few desert tribes to a global language, connecting people across vast distances. What about those who didn't convert to Islam? What happened to them under Muslim rule?
That's a common question. And while there were instances of forced conversions throughout history, early Islamic conquest generally allowed conquered people to practice their own religions. They were known as dhimmis and had to pay a tax, the jizya, in exchange for protection and freedom of worship.
So it wasn't a policy of forced conversion, but more of a system of coexistence, albeit with certain conditions. But I imagine converting to Islam did come with certain advantages.
Well, sure, converting meant exemption from the jizya, and it could open doors to social and political advancement. So conversion was often driven by a mix of faith, pragmatism, and social mobility. It wasn't always black and white.
It really is, right? History's full of shades of gray.
Yeah.
So we've got Islam spreading, empires rising, but I know there's another chapter to this story that I'm particularly excited about.
Ah, you're talking about the Golden Age.
Yes, the era of intellectual and cultural flourishing, the House of Wisdom, groundbreaking discoveries in math and science. It's all so captivating.
It's a truly remarkable period, and it's thanks in large part to the Abbasid Caliphate, who came to power in the 8th century CE. They shifted the focus from conquest to knowledge, establishing Baghdad as their capital and a center of learning.
Baghdad, the city of 1,001 nights. I can only imagine what it must have been like at its peak.
Imagine a city bustling with scholars and artists, a place where ideas from Greece, Persia, and India converged. That was Baghdad during the Golden Age. And at the heart of this intellectual ferment was the House of Wisdom.
That legendary library and research center. It's like something out of a fantasy novel. Tell me more about it.
It was a place where ancient texts were translated, where scholars from all over the world gathered to debate philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, and medicine. It was a true melting pot of ideas.
A global hub of knowledge and innovation. That sounds incredible.
It was. And this emphasis on knowledge wasn't just about intellectual curiosity. It was deeply rooted in Islamic teachings. Seeking knowledge was seen as a form of worship, a way to understand God's creation.
So this intellectual flourishing was fueled by a deep spiritual motivation. And it led to some remarkable breakthroughs, right? I mean, we were talking about the development of algebra, right?
Exactly. Al-Khwarizmi, a brilliant Persian mathematician, laid the foundation for what we now call algebra. His work revolutionized mathematics, influencing everything from engineering to computer science.
It's hard to imagine our world without algebra. No smartphones, no computers, no modern technology as we know it. It's like he provided the building blocks for the digital age.
You could say that. And his contributions, along with advancements in trigonometry, geometry, and astronomy, paved the way for other incredible innovations. Astrolabes for navigation, sophisticated water clocks, even early forms of robotics.
Wait, robots? In the Islamic Golden Age? Tell me more.
I know, it sounds almost too fantastic to be true, right? But Muslim engineers and inventors were creating all sorts of ingenious contraptions. Take the Banu Musa brothers, for example. They designed elaborate fountains, automatic doors, and even programmable musical instruments. They were pushing the boundaries of mechanics and engineering.
That's mind-blowing. Their approach to science seems so practical, focused on solving real-world problems.
It was. They weren't just theorizing, they were experimenting, building, innovating. This emphasis on observation and experimentation paved the way for the scientific revolution centuries later.
So we've got groundbreaking mathematics, amazing inventions, but let's not forget the incredible advancements in medicine during this period. What were some of the key breakthroughs in that field?
Islamic physicians were at the forefront of medical knowledge. Think of Al-Razi, a Persian physician who wrote extensively on diseases like smallpox and measles. He pioneered the use of clinical observation and challenged the ancient Greek theories about the human body.
I've read about Al-Razi. He was a true trailblazer. But there was another giant in the field of medicine, right? Ibn Sina, known as Avicenna in the West.
Ah, yes, Ibn Sina, true polymath. His canon of medicine was a masterpiece. It was a comprehensive medical encyclopedia synthesizing centuries of knowledge, from ancient Greek traditions to the latest discoveries of Islamic physicians. It was a standard medical text in Europe for centuries.
It's mind-boggling to think about the sheer volume of knowledge generated during this period. From groundbreaking medical texts to water-powered robots, it's an incredible legacy. But all golden ages eventually come to an end, right? What happened? What caused the decline of this flourishing civilization?
Well, it was a confluence of factors, both internal and external. There were internal conflicts, challenges to the authority of the Abbasid Caliphate, ideological differences that led to fragmentation within the Muslim world.
So cracks were starting to appear in the foundations of the empire. And I'm guessing external pressures also played a role. Invasions, perhaps.
You're right. The arrival of the Seljuk Turks from Central Asia, initially seen as protectors of the Abbasid Caliphate, eventually led to political instability. Then came the Crusades. a series of religious wars initiated by European Christian powers to reclaim the Holy Land.
The Crusades. A pivotal chapter in the history of Islam and the West, leaving a legacy that continues to this day. What was their impact on the Muslim world?
The Crusades had a profound impact, disrupting trade routes, fueling religious animosity, and contributing to the weakening of several Muslim states. While the Muslim world ultimately repelled the Crusader forces, the wars left scars on both sides.
A tragic clash of civilizations, really. But the most devastating blow came from a different direction, right?
Yes. From the east, we're talking about the Mongol conquests. The Mongol invasions, led by Genghis Khan and his successors, swept across vast swaths of Asia, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake.
And I remember reading about the sack of Baghdad in 1258. It was a catastrophic event that marked the end of the Abbasid Caliphate and the destruction of countless libraries and centers of learning.
It was a turning point, a cultural tragedy, the loss of invaluable knowledge, a symbol of the fracturing of the Islamic world.
It's heartbreaking to think about the loss of countless manuscripts, the destruction of libraries that had housed centuries of scholarship. But amidst all this turmoil, Islam didn't disappear, did it? It adapted, it spread to new frontiers.
Exactly. While traditional centers of Islamic power faced challenges, the faith continued to flourish in other parts of the world. Consider the spread of Islam to West Africa through trade. It led to the rise of powerful empires like Mali, with its legendary ruler Mansa Musa.
Ah, yes. Mansa Musa and his famous pilgrimage to Mecca. Didn't he cause inflation in Egypt because he brought so much gold with him?
He did. His caravan was legendary, laden with gold, and accompanied by thousands of attendants. Mansa Musa's pilgrimage showcased the wealth and power of the Mali Empire, and it helped to spread awareness of Islam in West Africa and beyond.
What a story. But it wasn't just about wealth, right? West Africa had its own centers of Islamic learning.
You're absolutely right. Timbuktu, a city in present-day Mali, became a renowned center of Islamic scholarship. Its libraries and mosques attracted students and scholars from all over West Africa. It was a testament to the dynamism and diversity of Islamic civilization.
So while the traditional heartlands of Islam faced challenges, new centers were emerging, each adding its own unique flavor to this rich tapestry.
Exactly. Islam was never a monolithic entity. It was, and is, a dynamic, evolving force, constantly adapting to new environments and cultural contexts.
This is also fascinating. We've covered so much ground: the rise of Islam, the spread of the empire, the Golden Age, the challenges and resilience, and we've only scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore.
Indeed. We haven't even touched on the Ottoman Empire or the intellectual and social movements that shaped the Muslim world in the 19th and 20th centuries. There's a whole world of knowledge waiting for us to uncover.
Well, listeners, buckle up. Our journey through Islamic history is far from over. Join us next time as we delve into the later chapters of this remarkable story.
So, we left off talking about all those new centers of Islamic civilization flourishing, and I think it's the perfect segue to talk about one of the most impactful empires in Islamic history.
You're talking about the Ottomans, right? The empire that straddled 3 continents and left an indelible mark on world history.
That's the one. Their story is a fascinating mix of military might, cultural brilliance, and political savvy. They emerged in Anatolia, present-day Turkey, and quickly became a major player in the region.
And their conquest of Constantinople in 1453 was a monumental event, right? I mean, capturing the capital of the Byzantine Empire, a city that had stood for over 1,000 years. That's like something out of a history book.
It was a seismic event, a symbolic victory for Islam that sent shockwaves through Europe and beyond. The Ottomans renamed the city Istanbul and made it the capital of their sprawling empire.
Istanbul, such a beautiful city and steeped in so much history. Okay, so we've got this rising empire conquering new territories, but I know they weren't just focused on military expansion, right? There was a cultural and intellectual side to the Ottoman story as well.
Absolutely. The Ottomans were patrons of the arts and sciences. They built magnificent mosques, palaces, and libraries. They encouraged scholarship and innovation, and their empire became a melting pot of cultures and ideas.
It's like that classic image of the Ottoman Sultan, 1 minute leading armies into battle, the next minute composing poetry or commissioning a grand mosque. A fascinating blend of power and refinement.
You've got it. And this duality is perfectly embodied in Suleiman the Magnificent, who ruled in the 16th century during what's considered the golden age of the Ottoman Empire.
Suleiman the Magnificent. The name itself evokes grandeur and opulence. He was the one who pushed the empire deep into Europe, right? Conquering Belgrade, laying siege to Vienna, battling the Habsburgs. He sounds like a force to be reckoned with.
He was a brilliant military strategist and a shrewd politician. Under his reign, the Ottoman Empire reached its greatest territorial extent, stretching from the borders of Persia to the gates of Vienna.
Wow, that's a vast empire. But as you said, he wasn't just a conqueror. He was a patron of the arts, a reformer, a builder. What were some of the key achievements of his reign?
Well, he overhauled the Ottoman legal system, reformed the administration, and invested heavily in public works like roads, bridges, and aqueducts. And of course, he commissioned some of the most iconic architectural masterpieces of the era, like the Süleymaniye Mosque in Istanbul.
I've seen pictures of that mosque. It's breathtaking. A masterpiece of Islamic architecture. It sounds like a true golden age military power combined with cultural brilliance. But I know that no empire lasts forever. What were some of the factors that led to the decline of the Ottomans?
Well, like all empires, they faced challenges both internal and external. Internally, they struggled with issues of succession, economic stagnation, and the difficulty of governing such a vast and diverse empire. And externally, they faced growing pressure from European powers who were rapidly expanding their influence around the world.
It's like history repeating itself. Internal strife combined with external pressures. It's a pattern we've seen time and again with empires throughout history.
It's a classic tale, unfortunately. And as European powers gained strength, fueled by the age of exploration and the Industrial Revolution, the Ottomans found themselves struggling to keep up. They were losing territory, their economy was falling behind, and there were growing calls for reform within the empire.
So the empire was at a crossroads. Modernize or risk being left behind. I know that in the 19th century there were a series of reforms known as the Tanzimat reforms aimed at modernizing the Ottoman state.
Oh.
What was the thinking behind those reforms, and how did they try to address the challenges facing the empire?
The Tanzimat reforms were a pivotal moment. The reformers recognized that the empire needed to adapt to survive in a rapidly changing world. They looked to Europe for inspiration, trying to incorporate Western ideas into the Ottoman system.
So they were trying to blend tradition with modernity. But I imagine such radical changes didn't go over well with everyone. There must have been a lot of resistance to those reforms.
Absolutely. It sparked intense debates and divisions within Ottoman society. Some people embraced the reforms, seeing them as essential for progress. Others resisted, fearing that they would erode Ottoman identity and traditional values.
It sounds like that tension between tradition and modernity, as we talked about before, played out in a big way during this period.
It did. And this wasn't just an Ottoman issue. It was a challenge facing Muslim societies across the globe as they confronted the forces of modernization and Western influence.
Right. It's like a global wave of change washing over the world, forcing societies to adapt and evolve or risk being swept away. And I know that while the Ottomans were trying to reform their empire, other parts of the Muslim world were facing the very real threat of European colonialism.
Exactly. European powers were expanding their empires, carving up Africa and Asia, and imposing their rule on millions of people. Muslim societies from North Africa to Southeast Asia found themselves under European control, their resources exploited, their traditional ways of life disrupted.
It must have been a time of great upheaval and uncertainty. What were some of the responses to this wave of colonialism? Did people just accept it passively, or were there movements of resistance?
Well, there were a variety of responses. Some people resisted through armed struggle, fighting for their independence and trying to drive out the colonizers. Others sought to negotiate and find ways to coexist within the new colonial system. And some advocated for reform, believing that the best way to regain strength was to adopt certain aspects of Western technology and governance.
So a mix of resistance, accommodation, and adaptation. Each group trying to navigate this new reality in their own way.
And what about those calls for Islamic revival that we talked about earlier? Did they continue to gain momentum in the face of these new challenges?
They did. In fact, the 19th and 20th centuries saw a resurgence of interest in Islamic thought and a growing emphasis on the role of religion in public life. There were thinkers like Jamal al-Din al-Afghani and Muhammad Abduh who advocated for a reinterpretation of Islam, seeking to reconcile tradition with the demands of the modern world.
So a kind of Islamic modernism, embracing progress while retaining the core values of their faith. I can see how that would appeal to people trying to find their place in a rapidly changing world.
It did. These reformers argued that Islam was inherently compatible with reason, science, and progress. They challenged the rigid interpretations of some traditional scholars and called for a more dynamic and engaged approach to Islamic thought. It sounds like they were trying to bridge the gap between the past and the present, showing that Islam wasn't stuck in the past, that it could adapt and thrive in the modern world.
They were. and their ideas had a profound impact, inspiring reform movements across the Muslim world and influencing the development of modern Islamic thought. But of course, this wasn't a monolithic movement. There were also those who held on to a more traditional view of Islam, seeing these new ideas as a threat to their way of life.
Right, that makes sense. It's that tension between tradition and modernity, playing out on an ideological level, the push and pull between holding on to the past and embracing the future. It's a constant throughout history.
It is. And the 20th century, with all its upheavals and transformations, was a crucible for this debate within the Muslim world.
And speaking of upheavals, I know there's one event in particular that had a seismic impact on the Muslim world: the end of the Ottoman Empire. After World War I, this once mighty empire was dismantled and new nation-states emerged in its place. What was the impact of this momentous event?
Well, the fall of the Ottoman Empire was a watershed moment. It marked the end of a centuries-old political and religious border, and it reshaped the map of the Middle East and beyond. It led to the creation of modern Turkey, a secular republic determined to forge its own path.
And I know the collapse of the Ottoman Empire also created a power vacuum in the Middle East, which led to all sorts of new challenges and conflicts.
It did. European powers, who had played a role in dismantling the Ottoman Empire, stepped in to redraw the map of the region, often with little regard for existing ethnic and religious divisions. This led to the creation of new states with arbitrary borders, which sowed the seeds for future conflicts.
So the legacy of colonialism, with its arbitrary borders and meddling in the affairs of other nations, continues to shape the political landscape of the Middle East to this day.
It does. The fall of the Ottoman Empire and the subsequent redrawing of the map had a profound impact on the region, creating new challenges and sparking new movements for self-determination and reform.
It sounds like a period of immense change and uncertainty. So much was happening: the collapse of empires, the rise of new nation-states, the struggle for independence from colonial rule. It must have been a defining era for the Muslim world.
It was. And it was a time when those calls for Islamic revival, those attempts to reconcile faith with the demands of the modern world, took on new urgency. People were searching for answers, looking for ways to navigate this new reality.
And those searches led to a variety of responses, didn't they? Some embraced modernity, others sought a return to tradition, and still others sought to find some middle ground, some way to bridge the gap between the past and the present.
Exactly. The 20th century was a time of intense debate and ferment within the Muslim world. Thinkers and activists grappled with the challenges of colonialism, the rise of secularism, and the allure of Western ideas.
It's a reminder that there's no single narrative when it comes to Islam. It's a faith with a rich and complex history, and there have always been a diversity of interpretations and responses to the challenges of the times.
Absolutely. And as we move into the 21st century, those debates continue. The Muslim world, like the rest of the globe, is grappling with the forces of globalization, technological change, and the search for identity and meaning in an increasingly interconnected world.
It's a fascinating and complex story, full of twists and turns, triumphs and tragedies. And it's a story that's still being written. But before we get into the 21st century, I think it's important to pause and reflect on what we've learned so far.
I agree. We've covered a lot of ground, from the rise of Islam in the Arabian Peninsula to the fall of empires, the spread of Islamic civilization to new frontiers, and the challenges of modernity. It's been a whirlwind tour through centuries of history.
A whirlwind, but an enlightening one. So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, what are some of the key takeaways you hope our listeners will remember?
Well, first and foremost, I hope they'll remember that the story of Islamic civilization is a human story, a tapestry woven from countless threads of individual lives, cultural encounters, intellectual achievements, and political struggles. It's a story of resilience, adaptation, and constant evolution.
And it's a story that challenges stereotypes and easy answers. The Muslim world is incredibly diverse, both culturally and religiously, and its history is full of nuance and complexity.
Exactly. It's not a monolithic entity. It's a mosaic of different cultures, traditions, and interpretations. And understanding this diversity is essential for appreciating the richness and complexity of Islamic history.
Well said. So, to our listeners, keep your minds open, challenge your assumptions, and embrace the beauty of nuance. The story of Islamic civilization is a tapestry worth exploring, and we've only just begun to unravel its threads.
You know, it's funny, right? We talk about history as if it's something in the past, something finished.
Yeah, like it's all settled and done with.
Yeah. But the reality is history is always unfolding. It's shaping our present and influencing our future, and I think that's especially true when we look at the Muslim world today.
Right. It's like we're living through history right now, witnessing events that will be studied and debated by future generations.
Exactly. And one of the most significant forces shaping the world today, including the Muslim world, is technology. The internet, social media, smartphones, they've transformed the way we communicate, the way we access information, even the way we think.
It's like the world has shrunk, you know? We can connect with people on the other side of the globe in an instant. It's amazing. But it also comes with challenges, doesn't it? Like the spread of misinformation and the rise of online extremism.
Oh, absolutely. Technology is a tool, and like any tool, it can be used for good or for ill. And for the Muslim world, which is already grappling with so many complex issues, navigating this digital landscape is crucial.
It's like a whole new battleground, isn't it?
Yeah,
The fight for hearts and minds is now playing out online as much as it is in the real world.
it is. And it's a battleground where traditional ideas about authority and identity are being challenged, where new voices are emerging, and where the very definition of what it means to be Muslim is being debated and redefined.
It's exciting and a little bit scary all at the same time.
I agree, but I think it's important to remember that change is a constant in history. Every generation faces its own unique challenges and opportunities, and the Muslim world is no different.
So as we look ahead to the future, what are some of the key trends shaping the Muslim world today? What are the issues that are top of mind for Muslims around the globe?
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges, and this is something that we've seen throughout history, is the struggle for political and economic justice. Many Muslim-majority countries are grappling with issues of poverty, inequality, corruption, and authoritarianism.
Right, and these issues are often intertwined with global power dynamics, with legacies of colonialism, and the ongoing influence of powerful nations.
Exactly. So it's not just about domestic politics. It's about how these countries fit into the global landscape, how they navigate the complex web of international relations and economic forces.
It's like they're trying to assert their agency, to chart their own course in a world that often seems stacked against them.
That's a great way to put it. It's about agency, about self-determination, about reclaiming their voices on the global stage. And then, of course, there's the ongoing debate about the role of Islam in modern society. How do Muslims reconcile their faith with the demands of a rapidly changing world?
It's a question that's been asked for centuries, and there's no easy answer, is there? I mean, there are so many different interpretations of Islam, so many different ways of being Muslim.
Exactly. There's no single monolithic Islam. It's a faith with 1.5 billion adherents, spread across the globe, each with their own unique cultures and traditions. And that diversity is both a strength and a challenge.
A strength because it allows for different perspectives and interpretations, but a challenge because it can lead to divisions and disagreements.
Right. And then, of course, there's the challenge of extremism. The actions of a small minority who twist and distort the teachings of Islam to justify violence and hatred have cast a shadow over the entire Muslim world.
It's tragic, and it's something that Muslims themselves are working hard to combat.
They are. There are countless Muslim scholars, activists, and community leaders who are speaking out against extremism, promoting a message of peace and tolerance, and working to build bridges of understanding across faiths and cultures.
It's important to remember that, right? That the vast majority of Muslims are peace-loving people who just want to live their lives in harmony with their neighbors.
Exactly. Islam is a faith that emphasizes compassion, justice, and peace. And it's important to elevate the voices of those who are upholding these values, both within the Muslim world and in the broader global community.
So, looking back on our journey through Islamic history, from the rise of Islam in 7th century Arabia to the complex realities of the 21st century, what have we learned? What are the key takeaways that you hope our listeners will carry with them?
Well, for me, one of the biggest takeaways is the incredible resilience and adaptability of Islamic civilization. It's a civilization that has faced countless challenges over the centuries: invasions, internal conflicts, the rise and fall of empires, the forces of modernization and globalization.
And yet, it has not only survived, it has thrived. It has spread to new corners of the world. It has contributed immensely to human knowledge and culture, and it continues to evolve and adapt to the changing times.
Exactly. And I think that's a powerful lesson for all of us, regardless of our faith or background. The ability to adapt, to learn from the past, to embrace change while holding on to our core values. These are qualities that are essential for navigating the complexities of the 21st century.
Well said. And I think it's also important to remember that the story of Islamic civilization is not a separate story, a footnote in the grand narrative of human history. It's an integral part of that narrative. It's a story that is woven into the fabric of our shared human experience, influencing art, science, literature, politics, and countless other aspects of our world.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the most important things for our listeners to take away from this deep dive, the interconnectedness of history. We are all part of a larger story, a tapestry woven from countless threads of human experience. And understanding this interconnectedness, appreciating the diversity of cultures and perspectives that have shaped our world, is essential for building a more just and peaceful future.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time for us to wrap up this incredible journey through Islamic history. It's been an honor to share this story with you, and I hope our listeners have enjoyed it as much as we have.
Me too. It's been a pleasure diving deep into this fascinating topic, and I hope it sparked a curiosity in our listeners to learn more, to explore the rich and complex world of Islamic civilization.
To our listeners, keep exploring, keep learning, keep asking questions. The world is full of fascinating stories waiting to be discovered. Until next time, stay curious.
And keep an open mind.